Derick Giwner along with Matt Rose for a Learn to Bet Harness Racing Driver Edition. There are a few people that come into contact with the horse each week and throughout the days, and it's a trainer, the caretaker, and the driver. The driver probably spends the least amount of time with the horse, but it could be the most important time.
Yeah, in this era, I know back in what's considered the old days, there were a lot of trainers and owners that also did the driving duties. But now in this era of the catch driver, we have leading catch drivers, Dave Miller, Tim Tetrick, Jason Bartlett over at Yonkers. And yes, like you said, they might have the least interaction with a horse at a given time, but they are by far the most important because they're on the track with the horse. They're holding the horse. They're communicating the horse. They're doing everything, making all the tactical decisions, and they're getting fair and or unfair praise and fair and or unfair criticism after the race as well.
Let's take a look at where to find the drivers in your past performances. This is the Harness Eye program, and we've outlined where you can find the drivers. They're actually in two locations. They're underneath the horse's name, and also it shows you the past performance, who drove the horse in the previous races.
Yeah, if you look at the number 4 horse, Real Cool Sam, for example, Dave Miller, you can see in all of his running lines on July 26th, July 16th, and so forth, and down the line. Over to the right of the page, you see the driver name listed next to the trainer name, and obviously that's a invaluable piece of information to see who drove the horse in his prior starts. Obviously, driver changes, which we'll touch on in a moment, is very important. But yeah, I mean, prominently displayed next to the horse's number and the horse's name is the driver, and that's probably the first place where people's eyes gravitate when they first open up a past performance program.
We're going to take a look at a picture of a driver in action. And one of the things that's great about drivers when it comes to harness racing is, for the most part, they all wear their own colors. So they're very easy to spot out on the track. Right there, we see a picture of Tim Tetrick in his green and gold.
Yeah, unlike thoroughbred racing, where most tracks have jockeys that follow certain owners or stables or trainers, drivers 99.9% of the time have their own colors, so they're very easily identifiable. And a lot of drivers have nicknames based on their colors. The Green Hornet, Orange Crush, for example. That it's very, very easy to identify with your favorite drivers simply by their colors, which is a huge advantage, I think, over some thoroughbred races where race to race jockeys wear different colored silks. So yeah, you see Tim Tetrick, and you're always going to recognize Tim Tetrick out on the track there, no matter what track he's at and what race he's in.
Let's bring up our first slide. It's driver skill level, as we begin to talk a little bit about what we're looking for here. And probably the most important thing you can look at is the win percentage.
Yeah, some track programs and some tracks furnish the statistics by win percentage. Some do it by UDRS, which is kind of like a slugging percentage, so to speak, in baseball. Obviously, it goes without saying, the higher percentage drivers are more likely to win. And you'll see in the your second point, you have the big fish in the small pond, so to speak, theory, and you can have a driver that wins at a high rate at one track and maybe at a lower rate at another track. So it's very important to note not only how many drives a driver might have at a specific track, but the percentage. And it goes without saying, the leading drivers, the cream rises to the top, and they will year in and year out have a higher win or a higher UDRS percentage.
But one of the ways you can actually tell, probably the easiest way you could tell, how good a driver really is, if you see a high percentage at one track and you're not sure how it translates to another, if you go onto the USTA website, and we have a slide to show you exactly where that is, you can actually pull down the top performers. You go into entries and results, hit top performers, and you can look at the best horses, the best drivers, the best trainers. And if you go to the best drivers, you'll see who the best ones are in the country in terms of wins, earnings, and stuff like that. So it'll give you a better idea of who the best is.
Yeah, I find it very interesting. I believe it compiles stats for the U.S. and Canada, so all of North America. You could sort it by starts, by number of wins, by money earned, purse money earned. I find it very interesting when I like to sort it through the money earned and see how much a certain driver has earned versus how many number of wins they have. And if you see a driver that has a lot of wins, and not as much money earned, generally it's because they're at a smaller circuit that has, the races for less money in general. But yeah, you'll see year in and year out that the top drivers at the top of the list, obviously. And I find it very interesting to compare average earnings per start. Let's say if X driver has 100 starts and he's earned 2.6 million, I find that as a very interesting and informative tool as well.
Now we know how to find the drivers in the program and how good they might be as far as win percentage or UDRS. Let's take a look at our next slide where we could talk about the style of the different drivers and how they race. And there's really, as in most things, there's two types of styles here. You can either be aggressive or you can be conservative. I have up there as aggressive guys like Derick Giwner and Aaron Merriman, because those are guys who really like to show early speed. They're very aggressive during the race, but it doesn't mean that they're only aggressive. It doesn't mean they can't come from off the pace or try something different.
No, of course not. I mean, you'll ask any driver, every race is different, every tactic is different. But yeah, there are certain drivers that earn a reputation of being very aggressive. They like to be out and winging early. They like to be near the front. And then you have other drivers, specifically a guy like Brian Sears, obviously one of the leading drivers in our sport for decades. You bring up a good example when you say a chess game or like a chess match where they're always thinking one or two steps ahead tactically. I don't need to be on the front end and try to go wire to wire. Where can I settle in? What horse should I follow? What kind of trip can I look for? And yeah, there are obviously certain drivers mix it up at certain times, but there are certain drivers that, and as handicappers and bettors, we will familiarize ourselves with these certain drivers, especially over certain circuits, what kind of style they look for. But they're, you know what, it's a handicapping variable. If you like speed and you like horses that are going to be close to the front end, you're going to gravitate to certain drivers in certain races, and vice versa. If you like closers, or if you like a guy that's maybe thinking more tactically. But yeah, I mean that all comes down to preference, and it's something that will be learned and adapted as you become familiar with whatever track or circuit you're following.
And of course, the best drivers, they could do a little bit of everything. I mean, they might tend to be a little bit more conservative. They might tend to be a little bit more conservative, but when the situation calls for it and you need to leave, they'll be gunning away from the gate. There's no doubt about that. Let's move on to our final slide here, which is driver changes. And that's certainly a huge part of harness racing. You often see a driver will be listed on 3 or 4 horses in a race, and they'll have to choose, which one they want to, decide to take. And then you've got to start asking yourself some questions, which is what I have up there. Which horse did my driver choose? Is it a big change? Does that driver fit the horse? I mean, these are all very important questions to ask yourself, because some horses race better with some drivers.
Yeah, well, you'll see the leading drivers at a particular track often has a choice of one or more horses that they could drive in a particular race. Some drivers will be loyal to certain owners or trainers in some instances, and some drivers in some instances will just choose who they think is the best horse, or the best chance they have to win, or the best chance they have to make money in a race. And obviously that's a huge handicapping variable. If you see a leading driver is listed on 3 or 4 horses and he selects one particular horse, obviously that can factor into your handicapping, and the smarter, sharp guys will try to use that to their advantage. But like you mentioned, certain drivers just get along with horses differently, and sometimes if you see a horse that's underachieving with a certain driver, and he picks up a different driver of what would generally be equal ability, that's a huge angle. A horse can wake up. Sometimes it's just a different set of hands or a different approach to how you control the horse. The horse can sense it, and yeah, I mean, obviously, moving from a lower percentage driver to a higher percentage driver is an obvious big ankle, but just sometimes a lateral move can make all the difference in the world, and can wake a horse up in a big way. So certainly, driver changes or who's driving the horse, who drove in previous starts, is an invaluable, most very important aspect of the handicapping game.
Without a doubt. I mean, a lateral move, doesn't necessarily mean that no change is going to occur. Sometimes, different set of hands creates a different kind of result. I mean, you also have to look at sometimes drivers will pick horses, and it's not necessarily picking the best horse. Sometimes they'll pick it for ulterior motives.
Well, yeah, like I mentioned, you have certain drivers that will be loyal to certain trainers or to certain owners. If a driver is listed on a horse for a stable for a trainer that has dozens and dozens and dozens of horses, I mean, obviously there are business decisions that come into play before just quote handicapping decisions. But this is something that as you follow a certain track or for a certain circuit, you will pick up on and you will be able to recognize. And then sometimes you have a driver that's loyal to a certain trainer and then chooses off that trainer. Gosh, I mean, that could be, that could be a huge red flag. I say red flag in a positive way. It could be a huge angle to in determining where your money's going to go in that race.
The money tends to follow the top drivers. So if you have a top driver and he picks off a horse to another horse, the horse he picked off of is likely to get overlooked in the wagering. And that's one of my favorite handicapping angles, is finding these horses that pick up another good driver who could get the job done. And maybe these horses were, maybe one horse is a fifth of a second better than that horse. That's not that much. And just getting a new driver is not going to make that big of a, going to hurt the horse at all. Well, so I stay on that horse, and instead of getting 3 to 5, I might get 5 to 2.
Yeah, from a value standpoint, obviously, yes, the top drivers are going to attract the most betting money. Not in every race, obviously, but in when all is said and done, yes, the top drivers are going to attract the most attention from the parimutuel handicappers. I think that goes without saying. And what that means is if you have a couple of top drivers that dominate at a certain track, they're not going to win every race. There's going to be a handful of races on the card that are going to be won by the second-tier drivers, and that's where the value is. That's where you have to find the value, and that's where you can make money handicapping and betting on this game.
Well, that's a wrap on Learn to Bet Harness Racing, the driver edition. Good luck.